Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you all have a copy of our Bible study today. This was all supposed to be one study we looked at the last 4 weeks, but I must have a gift that I can take one study and turn it into 5 studies. So today we will continue our discussion about the divine call. Last time we kind of ended with the process, the divine call process, talking about the training that teachers and pastors receive, and then the process by which a call is made at various different levels within the synod for different positions, and then the call being made to an individual. So today we're going to kind of pick that up and say, okay, what happens after a call has been extended, and then what considerations should one take into account when they deliberate a call. After a call has been extended. The divine call is not a hiring or a hiring and firing process. It is an expression of trust in the Lord that He is working through the district president's judgment that any person on the list is qualified for this particular call, and trust that the Lord is at work guiding the whole process, including that called person's decision. Let's consider the following encouragement from God's Word when it comes to putting the call into the Lord's hands and expressing trust. What do these passages tell us about that? Matthew 9:36, when Jesus saw the crowds, He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. When it comes to trusting the Lord, what does this passage tell us? What does it remind us of? How does Jesus feel about the congregation that is vacant, or the school that's vacant that needs a called worker to teach or a pastor to preach? How does Jesus feel? He has compassion. Okay, so Jesus sees the situation, He knows it, and He wants His people everywhere to be fed with His word and sacraments. Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of those who love Him. What confidence does this give us? Tim?
God has a plan for everything.
Okay, God has a plan for a congregation, through a group of believers, through the process that He's leading them. And it's going to be a good one. It's a plan to bless us. Even though there might be some bumps in the road, some unexpected twists and turns from our perspective, God's plan is to bless and show love. Psalm 13:15, our times are in His hands. Or, it says, my times are in your hands. But it's taking and saying, everything that we do, we commit it to the Lord. I'm reminded of that, passage if the Lord doesn't build a house, its builders labor in vain. If the Lord doesn't watch over a city, its watchmen stand guard in vain. Well, same kind of thing here, that, without the Lord and without putting this in His hands, we can't succeed. And He promises that He has us in His hands. And Matthew 9:38. Jesus said to His disciples, ask the Lord in the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into His harvest field. So, as the congregation calls, what should they also do at the same time? And what should all of us be doing at the same time?
Trust in the Lord.
Okay, and pray that God sends more workers, right? And we should always be in a state of continually encouraging young people, especially those who have a passion for ministry or an aptitude to do so, to take up that noble calling. Because there's always a need for more workers. As I've said to people many a times, this calling has job security, because there will always be sinners in this world until Jesus comes back. So perpetual job security. The call being extended to that person is also a promise to support the called worker as he or she labors among them according to the congregation's means. Think of 1 Timothy 5:18. There Paul says that a worker deserves its wages. He uses the illustration of you don't muzzle an ox while it's threshing the grain. In other words, it would be cruel and inhumane to take and muzzle the ox while he's trampling over the grain to give you food to eat, to then make him work and deny him food to eat. So Paul is saying, so too, the called worker deserves their wages, and again, in accordance with the congregation's means. In terms of the calls among us, in recent time at least, on average, most called workers normally take about 2 to 4 weeks to make their decision. Currently, for pastoral vacancies, congregations are averaging around 7 calls with 6 to 12 month-long vacancies. But some of them are considerably more. I know of several churches, even in our greater Twin Cities area, that are going on, some of them close to 2 years. So that can definitely be, think of those Bible passages we just had, that can be a very trying time for those brothers and sisters, and the confidence they have to put in the Lord, and that God does have a plan for them, and that He's working it for good in His way. So with those things in mind, why don't we promote some of the following among us, or why don't we encourage the following among us? Why don't you think we encourage interviewing multiple candidates for a called position? Why don't we have interviews? We talked last time about the call process, right, where the district president will put forth a call list, and the congregation then votes on that. They have some basic biographical info, but why not bring the person in and have the church council interview him? Or maybe bring in a couple people and say, okay, we'll interview you and the other person on the list. Let's interview all 4 of them. And when I say these things, I'm not trying to say there's a right and wrong here, but I'm just saying what might be some wise reasons why we don't do interview process. Tim?
One thing might just be the logistics. Some of these people live considerable distance away. I suppose you can do it online nowadays, but in the past, logistics may have been an issue.
Yeah, right. Good point. Logistically, you're calling someone from California, you're going to say, well, let's fly you out here and fly you back and hotel stay and everything else so that we can talk to you for a couple hours or something like that. What might be some other reasons? Susan?
I guess it kind of eliminates the leap of faith aspect of it. If you're bringing in the person, and then it makes it more of your decision versus trusting the Holy Spirit.
Okay, so that could be part of it too, that now you're taking and saying, well, because we've interviewed this person and we feel we have a better handle on who he or she is, well then, we've narrowed out all, we've whittled out all the problems there might be, and we've chosen the best candidate. What do you do when you go in for an interview?
Hopefully show your best.
All right. Right? An interview, if we've ever had interviews, what do? You go in there and you say all the good things about you, all your good qualities, all the good things that you've done. That can be problematic when it comes to ministry too. Just say, here's all my good things, and I'm going to put my best face on and best foot forward. If you're, and it can also take in for the candidate, it could also put super pressure on them too, right? We all know that when you go in for an interview, you are super stressed, especially if it's, if you will, a position that you want. Yeah, there's plenty of pressure in ministry, but is that necessarily a good representation of who that individual might be, to sit down and talk to him for an hour and then be in that stressful, questioning situation? Christy?
Maybe it puts the pressure on the people interviewing too, like what can they do for us as opposed to what does that person feel that they could do for that position.
Okay, so you're right, so kind of flipping it around as to what can the called worker offer, or bring, instead of them saying, what can you give us? We need you to do this, this, and this. If you're interviewing multiple candidates, what other, let's say, maybe less than positive things could happen? How our call process is now, it does happen sometimes where you'll get multiple calls at the same time. I had that happen to me once. But typically one doesn't, or the system designed that to try to eliminate someone getting more than one call. But what if someone says to you, hey, let's go in for an interview. Oh yeah, and by the way, I got a call to Oregon too. Then what happens? Well, we really need a pastor. We've been vacant for 2 years. Then, like I said, some maybe less than good thing can start to come in. Well, we'll pay an additional $2,000 for your moving. Or, we give you the top level of insurance, not level 3. And that can bring all kinds of bad things in. And again, I'm not saying it's wrong, sinful to interview candidates. Some churches do, okay? But maybe just more of an explanation as to some reason why we typically don't follow that practice. And what about something like audition sermons or teaching? It's similar maybe to interviewing, but why not say, okay, we called this pastor. He's our pastor candidate. Let's have him come in and give a practice trial sermon to the congregation. Maybe some of the same things with interview there, right? Then you get it where, okay, well, I'm going to give my very best sermon that I've ever done, and that's going to be the one that I preach. And then where's the focus necessarily that whole time during that whole worship service? Yeah, and the focus is on that person, Oh, we kind of stumbled there when you read that part. I don't know. Or didn't seem very charismatic when he spoke. Or however, so it's going to be, it would pretty much be like doing a group interview then, right? No? So again, not necessarily something wrong here, but there's some wisdom in not having these things.
But it seems like if you want to do that, I'm sure they're all taped nowadays or whatever, so you could watch one in a real life audience situation too if you want.
True, nowadays you could do that too. I mean, all of our sermons are recorded on YouTube and that sort of thing, so someone could check to see what kind of sermons or worship service or Bible studies they do. And keep in mind that, well, maybe it ties into this next one too. Why don't they show you like an extensive resume? Like I said, when we have a call list, it'll give you that person's name, their education background, maybe their strengths and weaknesses, their passions, what different places they've served, what levels they've served, things like that. But why don't they take and say, well, here's their resume, boom. And you got 5 pages stapled together. What is the same kind of thing we do with resumes that we do with interviews, right? How much can I pad this thing? And how, how much more can I make it all be about me and what I've done and what I know? So I think Susan's comment before is wise in that sometimes having more information takes our trust from one sphere to another. And this kind of gets to what Tim said about, well, we can take, and nowadays there's all kinds of social media things one can do. Now, when one receives a call, one could do all kinds of social media checking. You can social media check on the congregation, you can check on the pastor or the teacher, you can see who their friends are, you can see if there was, discontent in the congregation, you can see, any number of things. And doing too much, I'll say, snooping like that can also be unhealthy. Because then it can get the candidate, or the other side too, taking and fixated on one thing or another. And with all these things, let's say you do an audition sermon. Sermon is important. It's the chance that you get an opportunity to proclaim God's word, and probably to the most people you're going to get to proclaim to in the course of a week. But is that all there is to ministry? There's a lot more. So to just say, well, we got this one slice, and he gives an awesome sermon. We don't know how it might fit with the rest of our ministry. It's good that the district presidents have files on us, and they have backgrounds, and every year we have evaluations by people within the congregation, outside the congregation. So they have a well-rounded idea of who we are as pastors and teachers and staff ministers. All right, number 2, what are some ways that a vacancy can help a congregation? A congregation doesn't have a teacher or a pastor.
I guess it gives them an opportunity to evaluate their direction for ministry. Like instead of just saying, let's find a copycat to replace, what the person who just left, then like maybe our needs have changed since we called that first person, or maybe we're looking for something else.
Yes, yep, so given ability to redirect ministry, a break.
Other people can step up.
Okay, it gives,
Fill some of that emptiness from that vacancy.
yes,
So to speak, whether it's calling on the sick or whatever.
exactly. So taking and some of that, what we've talked about in the first lesson, the universal priesthood of all believers, taking and when there's a vacancy in the public side of the ministry, the congregation does have to step up. And I think it can cause all kinds of good things to happen. Like you said, people can say, well, where can I serve? Because we need people to serve, Or it also helps them maybe see, well, I never realized that pastor or teacher did that, and maybe have a newfound appreciation for some of the things that they did do. I know you guys think I just work, 3 hours a week when I do Bible class and sermon and worship and catechism. And I guess I have Wednesday night Bible study too, but there's plenty of other things going on. So, but it helps you take and see, it can help a congregation see what all those things are. Kind of along that same line, it can encourage a congregation to take ownership of ministry, to realize that your congregation is, or your ministry, whichever thing it may be, is not, if you will, just that pastor or just that teacher or just that principal. That person may have been a very important and central component of things that happened, but it's not where, well, that was us, and now that one person is gone, now our identity is gone, or our direction is gone. And throughout all this, it increases our trust and reliance on the Lord. Say, okay, how is the Lord going to get us through? So then the call deliberation process. After receiving a called worker, now, should be now, not new. Now, that's my mistake, now really has 2 calls and decisions to make. Step 1, if you will, in that process is the called worker gathers input. So discussions with the congregational leaders and members for honest and loving input. Pray for him or her, encourage and ask questions the worker may be considering about their call. So like when I get a call, I'll take the first people I notify after I notify the district president and others, is I notify the church council and let them know. Then I let the whole congregation know. And typically we'll have a church council meeting between when I receive a call and when I'm done deliberating on it, and that gives me a chance to talk face to face with our elders and leaders and get their input. A discussion with spouse and family. Discussion with leaders and members at the calling congregation, so trying to find out from them, what does ministry look like where you are? What things have you done? What direction are you currently wanting to go? Might you go? If you will, where might that new called worker fit in, and how might they fit in? And talking not only to their president and their church council leaders, but talking to some regular people in the pews too. And saying, you know, what's your perspective on things? Because the calls that I've had that really, you get some different vibes, I'll say. You get, you know, the leadership might say one thing, and you might talk to your everyday person in the pew, and they might say something very different. So there's either a disconnect there or something like that. Yes?
So they provide you with like the directory of their members and you just pick people at random?
Some congregations will provide you a directory. Oftentimes, they may take and say, well, is it okay if our members reach out to you? How do you want them to reach out to you?
Yeah.
You know? And sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get 10 calls, sometimes you get one, you know. So it's a hard thing because it's, you know, as one who's received calls, you don't necessarily want to get swamped with like, now I got to follow up on like 20 phone calls and have a 45-minute conversation for each one. But at the same time, you don't want to have none because then it seems like, well, is there interest here or is it not? So. And of course, then much prayer goes into the deliberation process too, as you consider what you've heard, consider your own gifts. Some questions for us. If a call is divine from God, why does a called worker have a choice or a decision? Should it maybe just be, well, okay, you've been called to Hawaii, you have to go. And there are some churches that are this way. Who was I talking to? I think it was one of our preschool parents. She said that in her church body, once you got a call somewhere else, you took it. It wasn't like there was any choice in the matter. It was, you got that call, okay, goodbye. And that's a way that one could do it. When one is called to another congregation, does their call to the current congregation cease? No, right? So in essence, you have two calls going on at the same time. And then God is giving the called worker through input, through prayer, careful consideration, in which of these two calls can I best serve him and his people? How can receiving a call be a benefit for the called worker and the congregation that they serve? So we've kind of talked about what a vacancy, how that can be beneficial. How can getting a call be beneficial to the called worker or the congregation? Some things are repeat and reverse, kind of. Tim?
Well, might help you assess whether you're really utilizing what you're most skilled at.
Okay, so it takes and it gives the called worker who receives the call a chance to step back and say, all right, let's review, and the congregation too gives them a chance to say, okay, let's review ministry here, refocus on priorities. Anything else, Susan? Do you have something to add?
That, I think, very similar to Tim's. It helps the called worker kind of evaluate, have they done all they can do? Are they just staying stagnant, or should they go somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. I think it also can help the, I'll say, dedication on either side too. You know, help. It can do some things that bond between called worker and congregation too, people that they serve, to make both sides realize the specialty of that relationship and kind of grow in it, and ability to I know I've thought to myself whenever I received a call, and I've returned all the ones I've received so far, Every time that's happened, though, it's always made me, in the back of my mind and my heart, say, all right, I decided to stay here. Let's get some things done, or let's take and continue with the mission and continue building the things that are here. Why is it important for the called worker who receives a call to gather input from a lot of people? Get it from the congregation, get it from family, get it from those who have called him or her. Christy?
Guess it gives you different perspectives, you know, like what each person evaluates in you as a person and what you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So to help, I think it's just to help give someone a well-rounded perspective of either side of things, just so that it's not just that person being in a bubble and flipping a coin and saying, well, which of these two, taken so that, if you will, by the time you're all done, the weight of evidence in your heart and in your head should lead you to accept or decline one or the other. Number 4, what kind of encouragement do you think could be helpful, or input could be helpful to a called worker? Kim?
Honest information.
Okay, honest. For one thing, being honest, it doesn't pay to take and say, well, every single thing that you do is just wonderful. Okay, that can really help pad my ego, but maybe being more specific about that and maybe focusing on maybe a strength or something like that and saying, Pastor, I really appreciate this part of what you do, or for a teacher, the way that you treated my child and how you encourage them, that changed them and changed our family. Okay. So current blessings, but also taking and encouraging about what things might be good on the other side too. When I've had calls, I've gotten some very good feedback from members who have said, I love this here, but in your call that you've received, I could see you doing well with this, or this being an avenue for you to use your gifts. So being honest that way too, where it's not all just one side. Funny story, and it kind of goes and bleeds into the next section about what things to consider in the call process and what things not. I recall that I think it was maybe the second call that I got. Eric Barsh, those of you who are here and remember Eric, it was a call. This call was one to southwestern Wisconsin. It was to some small town or something like that, and Eric sends me an email saying, why would he want to move there? It's in the middle of the marsh. No one lives there. There's no people there. There's no, and it's like, and he was kidding, but at the same time, I think that he was also serious. Why would anyone ever want to move there? So that's the kind of thing that, as we'll see in the next section, we don't need to encourage, because those things should not be considerations. There are 3 different sets of factors that relate to the decision process. The first, there are those things that a called worker should not consider. They are either not important or they are not factors that should influence the decision. Examples of such things that should not be considered would be things like a desirable location, or a nicer parsonage, a preferred climate. That's a hard one when you get a call to Arizona in January. Recreational activities that might match that person's habits or desires. A higher salary, easier workload with fewer challenges. The need to leave friends and family. Okay, so those are things that are, if you will, I guess I'll say, worldly things, right? They're not necessarily, none of those things are kingdom things. Having a better parsonage is not a kingdom thing. It's not a ministry thing. Second are those things that as humans we will think about and consider, but they will not in and of themselves determine the final decision. The examples would be, family considerations, such as education options. So think of, the place that I've been called. One of the things that has weighed on my mind is there a Lutheran school for my children nearby? Not that that's everything, but it's, or what other public school options are there, and what are the public schools like? What are they teaching? Family health considerations. Financial support and salary, but that's only something if the congregation doesn't supply enough support to provide for one's family. I had one call recently where the median cost for buying a home was approaching $500,000 for like a 2-bedroom home. And the salary was, even by, I guess I'll say, synodical standards, generous, but even at generous synodical standards, a $500,000 home for a called worker, unless your spouse happens to be a doctor or a lawyer, is pretty far out of reach. Or another thing, as Susan mentioned before, do I need a new challenge, or is my ministry plateaued or stalled? Do I, have I passed on the gifts that the Lord has given me, and can I use those better somewhere else? That gets into question number 3, or third point. There are 2 key questions that should determine the decision. The first one is, where can my God-given talents and skills accomplish the most good for God's kingdom? The other one is, where do my own weaknesses and limitations do the least harm? In seminary, we were always told that you work yourself out of a job. Wherever you're called, you use your gifts the best that you can, and eventually you come to that point where you've used all your gifts and you pass them on, and once all your gifts have been used, unfortunately, what's left are your weaknesses. And that may be a good time then to consider serving God elsewhere. Any questions on those sets of factors? We'll look at them in some discussion questions, but anything in general? Yes, Tim?
Well, I think it's a little different, if you're in a congregation, maybe even a larger congregation or more metropolitan, where you have a lot more turnover in membership. So you may have passed the gifts along to those members, but the members may have moved, versus a smaller, more rural congregation where there's not as much turnover in the membership. So that might be a big part of that.
That's a good point, Tim. I never thought of it that way before, that the pastor might say, but all the members might be moving, or a lot of them might be moving. Why is it important for the called worker who receives the call to keep these 3 categories in mind when considering the call? Okay, keeps them focused.
On the right or whatever, is it really what God wants me to do, or is it that I want this other stuff?
Okay. So so keeping them focused on, this is about gospel ministry, not, what is best for me in my career, what's best for me financially, what's best for me as, a family. So keeping their heart and mind focused in the right spot. I think keeping these considerations in mind also does a good job helping keeping the person balanced in their decision making too. we want to live by faith and trust in God, but faith and trust in God doesn't necessarily at the same time mean just making wild drop of a hat decisions, I'll say. You know, taking, like I said before, just taking the call and we're flipping a coin, being, okay, that's where we're going. God wants us to, he also gave us the gift of reason. He gave us the input of brothers and sisters to take and make a balanced, conscientious decision. At the same time, keeping these things in mind also keeps those worldly things, as I said in the first point, asks the called worker to keep those worldly things from clouding up God's call. I think we've kind of maybe looked at number 2, how can input from others help the called worker to do this? Getting that input from different individuals, from different people that are served. That's one thing that can be helpful. Okay, got input from the church leaders, but what about the preschool parents? When I have a call, I haven't done it every time, but sometimes I've taken and even let the preschool parents know that I have a call, even though, if you will, I'm not their pastor, but to let them know and just to get their feedback of how am I ministering to them and their children. Because honestly, I see many of these preschool parents sometimes more often than I see my members, because they come in here, every day for, 10 minutes at a time, and I get to talk to them, get to know them. So I am ministering to them too, if in a unofficial way. I'm not their only pastor in many cases. But that input, all those different areas of input, help take and give a rounded decision. Yes, Susan.
I think one thing I've always enjoyed too is that, for me, sometimes you feel like you're in your own little bubble or your own island, and you do your plan, or you do what you were supposed to do that day and whatnot. But then when you get input from other people, you kind of see, like, oh, okay, that was something good, or that was something they appreciate. Like, and not that you're doing it just to like get the appreciation, but if you feel like you're always in this little bubble, then you don't know what the impact is that you're doing. And so that is helpful too, just to see, oh, okay, the ministry I'm doing here is working. Right. So maybe stay here and keep doing that.
That's a good point. It is very easy to, generally speaking, how God's kingdom is that we don't see visible results that we might want, that you would maybe in some other field, right? But God's word always is effective and is always working. And it can be helpful for people to give that input and say, hey, you don't know it, but when you encourage me this way, it helped turn things around in our family, or made me reconsider my priorities in worship, or something like that. What roles do spouse and family play in the decision process? We had talked there about how it's important to get the input of spouse and family too, and consider how they use their spiritual gifts. Although they're not the ones being called, consider how are they using their spiritual gifts in the current congregation where they are too. And like I said, I consider my children's spiritual education, being able to go to a Lutheran school, consider how they can use their gifts in service and their spiritual growth and maturation as well. So that's also another thing that plays into the process as a whole. So then the final step of this part is the called worker then announces their decision on where to serve the Lord and His people. Whatever their decision may be, always remember a couple things. First of all, they still need your support. If that called worker decides to take a call, take the call and go away. They still need your support. And maybe they need it then even more than ever, I guess I might say, because the natural thing for the congregation, even hard as they try to fight it, or, the calling, they're going to feel, a sense of letdown, or you like them more than us, or, those kinds of things are just natural human ways of looking at it. But that called worker still needs your support, because to take the call was probably, and maybe even more so, a difficult decision than to stay, okay? Because the staying is known, the leaving is unknown, right? So they still need your support. And they're worthy of your support for how they have served you. And should the worker decide to continue serving where they currently are, always remember to pray for those calling. Like I said, some congregations have been vacant for months, even years. Keep them in your prayers. They need them. They too are sheep without a shepherd, and are anxiously waiting for God to send them the pastor, the teacher that they need. So keep on praying for God to send workers into his harvest field. Yes?
Does the calling process continue then throughout your ministry then at the congregation that you're in, so it doesn't ever end, or is there some?
Nope, there's not a stop. I mean, it ends, I guess it ends when you would, so to speak, decide to retire. But that being said, I'll say that, when it comes to being called, there's kind of a bell curve, as to when one is called and when not, just humanly speaking. A congregation might say, well, let's call a guy who is 40 and has 20 more years of ministry left, as opposed to let's call a guy who's 60 and has 5 years left, or you know what I mean. So, but should those things come into consideration, maybe, and maybe a big not too. Because what does that 60-year-old guy have that the 30 or 40-year-old guy doesn't have? What? A lot of experience, right? He has an extra 20 years of experience under his belt or her belt, and being able to do things perhaps much more efficiently, effectively. So wisdom comes with age. So it's unfortunate sometimes. I know that as pastor gets older, like we have our circuit meetings, and whenever we have a circuit meeting, we'll talk about, well, does anyone in the circuit have a call? And they'll share what they know, and the brother pastors will take and give input, just like seeking input from others. But you get some pastors who are older in the circuit, and they say, well, I haven't gotten a call in 10 years, and I get a call every 2 months. It's kind of unfair. Why not give that brother a call? He can have plenty of things, and he has plenty, and I think it should be more about what gifts does that person have and matching them up gift-wise. Age, not that should not come into the equation at all, but age can be a poor indicator of ministry. Tim?
Can you just comment briefly on how it would work if, when we were at Camp Grace, we called a Wells pastor, what would look like if we were to call an Els pastor?
Sure. Yeah, so how that works, we are in fellowship with the ELS, so we can call their pastors, they can call our pastors. Pastor Russo up at, now where Michelle's mom is, now my brain's Andover? What?
Redeeming Grace? No, he left Redeeming Grace.
No, I think he's in Andover. Is he in Andover? I don't know. Anyway, but that Pastor Russo has gone from Wells to Els to Wells to, I think he's gone back and forth a couple times. So it happens, and because we're in fellowship, it's something that is perfectly fine.
And it goes through a little different process then, because there's no district president, unless...
There is. I mean, I think then the district president takes and maybe contacts, may take and sometimes the district president knows, pastors who are in ELS and pastors who are in Wells, so maybe they're able to say, I think this person would be a good candidate, possibly even though if they're in Wells or Elms. And I know sometimes, like when we were looking for a teacher candidate, we contacted them and said, do you have any preschool candidates available? So, could be a situation like that too. All right, next time we are going to look at the blessings of the public ministry for the called worker and for those who are served. It'll probably be a little bit shorter lesson just because I thought about trying to tack it on to this one, but the subject matter was a little bit different and our timing is right on. So next week's might be a little bit shorter, but we'll pick that up then. Thank you. We'll see you then.